Welcome back to the Land of Bourbon and Bad Decisions. This is the Relentless Daring Podcast, and I am your host, Tyler Morgan, and we are engaging in the relentless daring pursuit of truth, justice, and American jackassery. So, big things I want to hit on this episode is freedom of speech and how it is yet again under attack, oath breakers, and celebrate the 15th anniversary of the Killdozer in a way that's not exactly celebratory. But first of all, we're going to get into the attacks on free speech. I know this is something I hit on an earlier podcast, but as things have been progressing, I find myself looking more and more for clarity on what I believe, what I feel about the freedom of speech and the role of government in protecting our First Amendment rights. And so, one of the things you really got to look, because you have these big government or these big corporations who are going to the federal government saying, quick, give me more regulations, regulate me. I need you to tell me how to run the right way. And that's just not the right answer. But at the same time, I feel that there is definitely a role of government. And you have to look back at our founding documents and see what they say. Looking back at the Declaration of Independence, where we broke away from, the Kingdom of England, and we said, we are going to form a new government. We're going to rule ourselves, and here is how we are, and here are the principles, those bedrock issues that we are going to use to guide how this government operates. If I, quote, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. End quote. If a government is instituted amongst men in order to secure those rights, and our Bill of Rights, which lays out, those handful of items which the government cannot, will not, and shall never do to its people. There has to be a point when, as conservatives, as libertarians, we look at these tech companies and say we have to have the government step in because they are acting outside the Constitution, which governs our government, and they are oppressing speech that they do not agree with, speech that they find reprehensible, ideas that they find unfathomable. But we sit back as conservatives and libertarians and we say, well, it's a private business. They can run things the way they want. Well, at the same time, we have, while that may be true, we also have to look at the fact that, the government is not coming and saying, well, I'm sorry, you can't say that. Or you can't have that opinion. You cannot express that opinion. You cannot share that religious belief. We have extra governmental bodies. YouTube, Google, Amazon, Twitter, Facebook, all coming out and turning on conservative thoughts, conservative principles, because they don't like it, because they don't jive with the primarily left-leaning admins at the at these companies who control algorithms and everything else. So at what point do we say, as conservatives, as libertarians, all right, government, normally we don't want you involved. We want you to stay over there in DC, way the hell away from us. But we're tagging you in, partner. We're tagging you in to come and deal with this, because our thoughts are being victims of a technological book burning, so to speak. You look at the big thing's been going on this week has been between Steven Crowder and Carlos Maza, which Crowder, and he is who he is. He's a comedian. He takes pot shots at media figures that are wrong, media figures that maybe they're right, but he just doesn't agree with them, and he uses comedy to ferret out the issues behind the issue and to get his point across. It's called satire. It's been a staple of American political thought for, I don't know, the last 100-some years. But this Massa guy, well, he doesn't like what Crowder has to say, because, oh my gosh, like, he's making fun of the fact that I'm homosexual and that I'm Latinx. Well, dude, your whole online persona is, look at me, I'm the Queen of New York. But you don't like it when someone who is straight makes fun of the persona, the shtick that you put out online for everyone to see. It'd be like if I had a truly public image that I always made sure to play up anytime I made if I were making YouTube videos, if I were a speaker somewhere and I played it up while giving a speech, and then I got upset that someone, whether it be from the right, whether it be a fairly apolitical comedian, whether it be someone on the left, were to come out and then start making fun of this persona. It's like if Dean Martin ever got upset about someone making fun of his persona of always being drunk, because it always looked like he had a glass of whiskey while he was performing. When insiders tell you, no, it wasn't whiskey, it was iced tea. But here's this guy. He's gone. He's gotten his parent company to go to YouTube and go, well, he's being naughty. You need to do something about him, because we can't have that kind of naughtiness happening. It's just not right. And YouTube looked at his stuff and was like, well, his individual videos don't seem to violate any of our rules. And then, to which, Mr. Massa went on Twitter on a huge rant, and oh my God, Twitter is oh my God, YouTube is like totally backing him up, and they're not going to punish him because he's saying all these naughty things about me. And YouTube goes back and they go, well, yeah, again, he didn't really violate any rules, but the body of his work is unsafe for our community, so we're not going to ban him, but we're just going to demonetize him. Well, thank goodness Crowder has, was already selling subscriptions for premium content, via the Mug Club, or else, Steven Crowder and maybe minus a few diehard employees who don't mind working for free, they'd be screwed because YouTube demonetized them. And right now this podcast is small. I'm still waiting to hear and see if maybe a Podbean advertiser wants to put ads on, attach ads to this podcast. I hope I get there. I've reached out to a place, see if maybe I could sell some ad space to them. Maybe it works out. I don't know. Right now I'm doing this all out of pocket. Which, speaking of out of pocket purchases, new recording equipment comes next week. So hopefully, next podcast has a little bit better sound quality. So here it is, this guy's going out of his way to destroy a person's livelihood. Again, going back to that very specific line, or two lines from the Declaration of Independence, guarantee the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And the government's instituted to protect those rights. Where is the government not stepping in and going, whoa, 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 whoa. You can't do that. Interstate Commerce Clause. You're interfering with interstate commerce by demonetizing him. Yes, that's right. I am referencing a progressive Supreme Court ruling where if not selling your wheat may influence interstate commerce, the federal government can come in and say, this is what you're going to do with your wheat. I am going to reference that because, if that's the standard that was set forth in the 1930s, why is it not being applied now? Man, my computer's making all sorts of noises at me. But, it's crazy that, we sit back and we go, well, Facebook, they can do what they want. YouTube, they can adjust the algorithm however they want. It's their company, their private business. If a baker can choose not to make a cake, they can choose not to air this kind of, political discourse that they don't find appealing. Well, that's all well and good. Unfortunately, we're going to sit back and we're going to be like Congress is now, saying the executive branch has too much power. Well, why does the executive branch have too much power? Because Congress kept saying, we don't want to deal with that. We want to fundraise. Here, we'll sign this law. Okay, executive branch, you can do this. Executive branch, you can do this. Executive branch, you can do this. Now they bitch and moan that, oh my God, there's just too much power in the executive branch. Well, whose fault is that? You're the knuckleheads who gave them the power. And we're going to be doing the same thing if we do not step up and have our congressmen get involved, have our senators drag these social media heads into the Senate and House wells and beat them up about it and go, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you making these decisions? And actually enforce the First Amendment. Actually enforce the government stand, the government's position that is there to protect rights for everyone, from everyone. The government has, the government doesn't have a monopoly on just protecting someone on the streets from having me come up and, kidnap them, drag them back to my house, and hold on to them for however long. There's laws there that protect other people from being unlawfully detained, protect people from being kidnapped, protect people from being murdered. Well, if not protect them from being murdered, to punish someone who would violate the right to life of another human being. So why doesn't the government get involved when you have these companies who go after the unalienable right to the pursuit of happiness, or they go against an individual's First Amendment right to say that homosexual marriage is wrong? This is not necessarily my position. This is just an argument I'm making for the sake of the podcast. Or to say, or, why aren't they protecting someone's right to say horrible things like black people are bad? Again, not my position, just something I'm bringing up for the sake of the argument, because these are things that people legitimately believe for whatever reason they choose to believe it. And if you're going to be a diehard constitutionalist, you have to allow people to say things you do not agree with, and you have to be willing to fight for their right to say those things. I think the KKK, neo-Nazis, Aryan Brotherhood, all of these crazy-ass white supremacist groups are the absolute worst dregs of society. But they have every right as citizens of the United States of America to spew their garbage. Period. End of story. And if they have their right to say their horrible things, then I have every right to go on Podbean and post my political beliefs through this podcast without Podbean coming at me and saying, "Well, you see, Tyler, there's a problem with you thinking that everybody should be allowed to own a gun no matter what. And so we're no longer going to host your podcast." And that's essentially, oh man, smack my boom. And, that's essentially what's going on when, YouTube deplatformed Alex Jones. And it's just, as much as I don't like Alex Jones, as much as I think that what he spews is a bunch of crap and garbage, he has every right to spew it. Which, fortunately, like, Steven Crowder, Alex Jones does have Infowars.com, so people can still go there and, watch him freak out about, how the government's trying to bring a frogs gay, or whatever it is he's ranting about these days, and pay a subscription for it. That is all well and good. That is, his business. He's allowed to run it how he sees fit, as long as he's not trampling on the rights of other people. But at the same time, again, when you have these technocrats in social media who are doing what they can to throttle speech that they don't like, government needs to step in and say, you can't do that. We understand you are a business, but what you're doing is just as discriminatory as saying blacks can't eat at the counter, or anyone can apply except the Irish. It is clearly discrimination. However, it may not be racially motivated, it may not be ethnically motivated, but it is still a politically motivated discrimination meant to hold down those whom you do not agree with. But then again, we also have people serving in office who can't seem to remember their oath of office. Segueing here into subject number 2, oath breakers. So far on the campaign trails, there are 2 veterans who are currently trying to, who are currently seeking the nomination for the Democratic presidential candidacy. Mayor Pete Buttigieg and Congressman Seth Moulton. Now, I bring up these two, and you also have current sitting senators such as Kirsten Gillibrand, Bernie Sanders, Kamala Harris. Was it Klobuchar out of Minnesota? Whoever replaced Al Gropey Franken. They've all taken oaths. Well, okay, maybe. Well, yeah, Seth Moulton did. And I really can't say if Pete Buttigieg took an oath because he was a commissioned officer in the Navy Reserves. But every one of them who currently holds a seat in the federal government, as part of their oath of office, has uttered the lines, "I do solemnly swear to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same." Whether it were to be an oath of enlistment, like I did and lived up to for 16 years of military service, or whether that they got elected into Congress, or they were elected into the Senate, were sworn to uphold and defend the Constitution. The parts you like, the parts you don't like. Granted, the parts you don't like, you can say, I don't agree with this, so let's work to change it, as opposed to, yeah, we don't like it, so we're not going to do anything to protect it. And really where that you see a lot of that, I'm not going to protect the Constitution, it usually comes with Second Amendment because, guns. Guns are scary. Because guns are scary. And we can't have people getting killed. And that's just a horrible, horrible workaround towards, changing the Constitution when you won't even defend what's there, and then say we need to change it. They just come out and attack it. Some of the, like I said, the worst offenders, in my opinion, are especially those former service members and veterans. Notice there, I said former service members and veterans because there is a key distinction. A veteran is a person who has served overseas in a place of conflict. Iraq, Afghanistan, Vietnam, Saudi Arabia, or well, not Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, going into Iraq in 91, stuff like that. A former service member is someone along the lines of Dick Blumenthal, also known as Danang Dick, according to President Trump, who spent years telling his constituents that he was a Vietnam veteran. No, he is a Vietnam-era former service member. Totally different things. He was in the service during Vietnam. He never actually served in Vietnam. But I digress. You have like Pete Buttigieg and Seth Moulton. Seth Moulton, it shocks me that, he has taken such a hard stance and, going against these, quote, weapons of war, end quote, because he was a Marine. He was a Marine officer. He was a Marine infantry officer. Based on that fact alone, I have a lot of respect for him because he's been on the ground getting shot at, sending Scunyon back down range at the people trying to kill him. And so you would think a former military officer would have a little bit higher opinion of the Second Amendment, especially if they're running for president and they hope to get the military to vote for them. Like I said, you would think that, wouldn't you? Senator Tammy Duckworth, also former Army. She was a helicopter pilot who was shot down. Lost one leg as a result of her injuries and was wheelchair bound, and I think she had the other leg was eventually amputated due to complications from her injuries. I don't know that for sure, so don't hold me to it. And I commend Senator Duckworth's service as a soldier. However, I cannot commend her stance on guns. I get it, gun violence is scary. Kamala Harris was tweeting out facts today that, 100 people a day are killed by guns in America. Well, technically true, as Mr. Collion Noir, I think that's how you pronounce his Twitter name, his NRA persona. Love him. He's an attorney. He's a gun nut. And he's black. Shh, don't tell anyone. But he has a great perspective on guns. He's a guy who he didn't grow up with guns, and then went to the range with buddies and just fell in love with the gun culture. And now he had YouTube videos for years doing gun reviews, getting involved in 3-gun competition, and going out shooting new and interesting firearms. And now he has a show with NRA TV, which is, I think, awesome. Now, he came out with some interesting facts. No, it's not 100 people are killed a day by guns in America. It's 108. 65% of that 108 is suicide. So that leaves, what, 40 or 35 deaths per day, roughly. And if you break it down, the majority of those gun deaths every day are drug or gang related. Approximately 1 a day is an accidental death. So really, we don't necessarily have a gun death problem in America. If you factor out suicides by gun, we have a drug and gang violence problem. But despite the numbers from the Department of Justice, from the FBI, from the CDC, these are things that our Democratic friends over, who are in the Senate and the House and running for president, they just don't want to hear it because facts always seem to run counterintuitive to whatever narrative they're trying to push. and whatever the narrative is they're trying to push, if it looks bad that they're going against their oath of office, their oath of enlistment, if they're, a former enlisted soldier, or I'm going to look this up here. Oath of, I learn how to spell. Oath of commission. Oh, even the oath of commissioned officers. I state your name, do solemnly swear, or affirm that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same. That I take this obligation freely, without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion. And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties of the office on which I am about to enter, so help me God. Title 5, U.S. Code 331. An individual except the President, elected or appointed to an office of honor or profit in the civil service or uniformed services. So, I mean, there were, so the Seth Moultons and the Pete Buttigieg's of the world, with their, military background, they've also had to have this oath. And they just piss it away because, well, that, it doesn't help me win votes from my side. I'm not going to get support from the people like the Women's March or whatever left-wing anti-gun craziness is willing to support them, because that's who they want to vote for them. And at the same time, they also come out and say AOC came out after a minor league baseball team ran a Memorial Day video it was different clips and pictures set to a speech from Ronald Reagan, and he used the line "enemies of liberty." And when the line "enemies of liberty" was used, it flashed pictures of Kim Jong Un, Fidel Castro, and a third person whose name I can't remember right off the top of my head, and AOC. And AOC, who has again taken an oath to uphold and defend the United States Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, and to bear true faith and allegiance to the same, came out and said, how much free speech do we really need? That's a scary thought. When, as I did in the first segment about, free speech being under attack, when we have people in government who are supposed to be defending those rights come out and openly attack those rights. It's beyond the pale. If you are serving in the United States government and you are openly calling for the restriction of rights for Americans because they say things that you don't like, because they take the line, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. They take that very seriously. Because they think that, like in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina, that soldiers shouldn't just be moving into churches and spending the night or turning that to their CP, because they need, without gaining permission from the pastor or moving into someone's house, without the homeowner's permission. And if you think that one's a big deal, or Fourth Amendment rights, I just saw a story today where a police department went into somebody's home without a warrant, collected evidence that was, fairly damning, and then a panel of judges all ruled that, oh well, yeah, they didn't have a warrant, but they caught stuff that proves he's guilty of something, so it will be admissible in court. They collected blood from the sidewalk outside O.J. Simpson's house that could have helped connect O.J. Simpson to the murder of his ex-wife and, her friend. But because the search warrant and the warrant to collect evidence did not say the sidewalk outside the home, O.J. Simpson's dream team of crack attorneys were able to get that blood evidence thrown out. Professor William Ayers, University of Chicago, convicted of being a domestic terrorist. He was freed from prison due to a technicality on the warrant for the wiretap. And it was the wiretap evidence that led to his conviction. That evidence was thrown out. The conviction was set aside. The charges were dropped because without that telephone conversation that was taped, they could not make the prosecution stick. And William Ayers is out teaching the Utes of America, his twisted view on the world. So if the Fourth Amendment was good enough to protect them, why is it not good enough to be protecting, the average everyday person? And it's getting to the point where, there really needs to be a much better vetting process for the voters in determining who they're going to vote for, because who's going to want to vote for a candidate who, could turn around and go, yeah, I know I said that. I'm not even talking political promises. I'm talking legitimate constitutional questions that they just, at the drop of a hat, go, yeah, I know, the 10th Amendment is good and all, but, the states, the individual states are just, their state governments are just not good enough to figure it out. So we know it doesn't say we have this power in the Constitution, but we here at the federal government know better, so we're just going to do it anyways. We know unreasonable bail is against the Constitution, but this guy who was picked up for unpaid parking tickets, we're still going to, and he doesn't have any money to be able to afford even the lowest of bails, we're going to set the bail to where he cannot achieve the means to bond out and be able to leave jail until after his hearing, till after his trial. We don't have people standing up against that in Congress, at the presidency, even at the local and state levels. I'm not going to say that I think cash bail is a bad thing. I think cash bail is a very good thing, especially when it comes to, people who pose an imminent threat. We do not want them to be able to, have a buddy come and pay the 10% down, and then they go to a bail bondsman for the rest of it, and then they're free to go out and commit an act of retaliation against the person who got them arrested. We don't want someone who's a flight risk to be able to have someone come have him pay the bond and then absconds to a non-extradition country. So I'm not about to rail against the cash bail system. It has a purpose. I think the cash bail system does need to be reformed to make it more in line with the Constitution. And again, it goes back to politicians who are more concerned about power than they are concerned about their oaths. Service members who look at their oath not as a sacred duty that is an honor to have done, but as just a block they had to check in order to join the service. I still believe that oath. And we as Americans, it is incumbent on us to hold accountable those politicians who go into office and betray that oath. We have to hold their feet to the fire. Doesn't matter if it's a Republican, if it is a Democrat, if it is a Libertarian. If they take that oath of office and they do not live up to it, it is our jobs to make sure that they're removed. Put in someone who is not just going to be my team versus your team, the ends justify the means. Say what you want about Justin Amash and his saying that Donald Trump committed an impeachable offense and that he should be impeached and that he should go through the impeachment process. If you set that aside and you look at him holding on to the principles and his oath to the Constitution, not to the Republican Party, not to the Republican president, not to the Republican leadership in the House, but to his oath of office and to the principles on which that oath is meant to protect and defend. That is the kind of person we want in office. A person who's going to say, you know what, this isn't popular. I know it's probably going to kill me and ruin my career, but by God, I'm going to stand for it. We don't have enough of those Mr. Smiths go to Washington types, and we need more of them. All right, now I'm going to get into the coup de grace for this episode. I promised it earlier this week. The Killdozer. Oh my goodness. So, leading up to it, I started, doing my research on this, and earlier this week, June 4th, was the 15th anniversary of Marvin Heemeyer, Heemeyer. Oh man, I keep smacking that boom. It's one of the things I look forward to when I get my new recording equipment. Is the microphone has a shock mount, so if I smack the boom, it shouldn't be transferring to the mic. So anyways, I digress. Marvin Heemeyer, 15 years ago, June 4th, 2004, as the small government, get the local government out of my life people will tell you, a good man was pushed to the limit by crooked local politicians and through business wheelings and dealings and chicanery and tomfoolery on on the part of the local business owner, he was left with no choice but to defend his honor by taking a large Komatsu bulldozer, building armor out of steel and concrete, encapsulating himself in said bulldozer with the shield around it, and knocking down the town of Granby, Colorado. Because there comes a point when reasonable men are forced to do unreasonable things. It's a quote from a letter or audio recording sent to the brother of Marvin Heemeyer. But the story itself is way more complicated than a funny Gadsden flag that has an armored bulldozer in lieu of a rattlesnake that says, in the phrase, "Tread on those who tread on you." So this is a process this is a story that was, 12 years in the making. When, Marvin Heemeyer, he moved to Granby and he bought a parcel of land and he built a muffler shop. And that was all well and good. And then he had agreed to sell a portion of his land to another business developer who was going to build a concrete plant. And they agreed on a price, and they get to the negotiation table to start finalizing things, and Heemeyer jacks the price up. And he jacks the price up again. And a tactic basically is like trying to force the owners of the forthcoming concrete plant to bow out and just go, no, on second thought, we're not going to build it here because obviously you're not going to sell it to us. Well, and he wasn't the most stable of people. They forced him into court where they got it rezoned to where, yes, we can have this concrete plant here and we are going to get this land. So he was forced to sell a portion of his land, and the concrete plant, they built a road behind his muffler shop, which, in the process, they cut off the shortcut that he used to go from his home to the muffler shop. So that was something that he was not a huge fan of, and he claimed that in the process of building the road, they broke his sewer line, so he was forced to put in his own septic tank and then drain it himself, and he'd take it across the driveway to the concrete plant, and there's a drainage ditch over there he would dump the waste into, and he was caught doing that and was fined, and immediately, well, it's not my fault, it's a damn concrete company. And he basically, in all of his rambling letters to his brother they sent prior to, within a few days before the Killdozer rampage, he set himself up that he was this poor martyr, that he was this victim. But his history in Granby, he's the kind of person. He had someone who was delinquent in paying $125 for a muffler repair, and started harassing, berating, and threatening that customer. that customer, they made good, but they sent an intermediary to actually pay the money for it because they were worried about being attacked by him when they showed up. And the whole process, it wasn't just that he snapped and one day he welded some steel plates to to this bulldozer. It took him almost a year and a half to build it. He used tool steel that he had to purchase from out of town from a steel distributor because even the local even the close steel supply shops, they that's not plate they carried. He used a very specific 5,000 psi concrete, and he built these panels at upwards of a foot thick. During that time, he acquired an AR-10, basically AR-15, but chambered in 308 Winchester, a Barrett 50 caliber rifle, a shotgun, and some other weapons, and he carted them into the Killdozer, which he built with, cameras on the outside so he could see, gun turrets that he used to shoot at propane tanks and transformers with the 50 caliber rifle. He was loaded for bear because he knew what he was getting into. This wasn't he just snapped at the spur of the moment. He, it was through 911, with cops on the ground watching what he was doing, calling the local library and saying, "Hey, get everyone out of there now. The crazy man in a bulldozer is getting ready to, crash into your building." When he went on his rampage, there were kids who were participating in a reading program at the library. The widow of the mayor, who had been the mayor when the zoning dispute happened, his widow, her house was knocked off its foundation because why? She had nothing to do with it. He was attacked. He just snapped and went after a dead man. Now all of this was 100% calculated, and he had no intention of ever coming out of that Killdozer alive. And the governor of Colorado at the time was actually heavily considering whether he was going to need to call in the National Guard and have them bring, with, Apache helicopters with, live munitions to destroy this bulldozer. The only reason they didn't is because when he rammed it into the hardware store, he didn't account on their basement. And the bulldozer fell all cockeyed into the basement and couldn't get out, at which point he killed himself. But he's held up at, this mythos built up around him that, he was the next Buford Presser, a man pushed to happen to do what he did to seek justice against a corrupt system. But it wasn't the case at all, and it's amazing how in this day of distrust of government and seeing the abuses that government does against people, like the Kilo case in Connecticut, where the town bought up a neighborhood, had it demolished to have a Pfizer plant built, and then the Pfizer plant never even showed up. They backed out at the last second because they got a better deal somewhere else. And we live in that society, so it's really easy for nutcases like this guy to be put up on a pedestal. So, we just really have to kind of stop and look at some of the stories that come across that, oh, this person's a hero because X, Y, and Z. This person's a hero because they did that. Hold this person up because, you really at the point where you have to stop and, really look into who these people are saying we should be worshiping are. Because some of them, like the Killdozer guy, not worth a hoot and holler at all. All right, thank you again for joining me on this episode of Relentless Daring. Again, feel free to keep up with me on the social medias. The Relentless Daring Twitter page at Daring Podcast. There's my personal Twitter page, at Real Tyler Morgan. Check me out on Facebook, facebook.com/Relentless Daring. And also, I'm hosted on Podbean, obviously. You can find me on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify. Oh my gosh, this list is starting to get so long I can't remember it all. Stitcher, Spotify, and now on iHeartRadio. Again, if you like what you're hearing and you want to support me, please go on to patreon.com and search for Relentless Daring. Become a patron over there. Again, help me to build this thing up to, be able to reach more people. If you go on iTunes, do 4 things. Subscribe to it, rate it, review it, and share it with your friends. Get it out there, please. Again, thank you so much for listening. And as always, stay relentless.